All pop culture references mentioned during this podcast are analyzed and scored by artificial intelligence. Jeff and Chris have learned not to argue with AI's decisions and strongly suggest you shut your mouth as well.
So, Jeff, I don't know how this popped in my head, and I think it was actually seeing a dune buggy on the back of somebody pulling a dune buggy, right, on pulling behind this big monstrous truck. And I couldn't tell you, I didn't really do a lot of dune buggying, although I think we knew people like that back in our day who that's kind of what their things that they did with their families on weekends. But I do, so I think the closest thing I ever came to an actual dune buggy was speed buggy. Okay, and do you remember Speed Buggy from Saturday morning TV? I'm sure.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course I do. I mean,
Of course you do.
Yeah.
Because it
Yeah.
fits right into the right in the wheelhouse of what we talk about. But
Yeah.
but again, it was Speed Buggy also, and it had to take a step back because it was like, go with me here. And again, I think you understand. And for those of us watching, and Jeff, I don't know if we need to run the disclaimer about, whether you're watching on YouTube or on the Spotify video option. We'll try to be as descriptive as possible of those of you who are not. An animated dune buggy with big bulgy headlights and sort of for eyes and a grill for a mouth, and Speed Buggy was essentially alive, right? And kind of grunted and gurgled and communicated. And the Speed Buggy, cast.
Wait, hold on a second, Chris. I have to stop you for 1 second because this entire episode I can already tell is going to be filled with these.
Okay.
Did you just say he kind of gruntled and gurgled to communicate?
Something like that. Okay, go with me here, Jeff. Just go with me.
No. You're completely accurate. I'm not faulting you for your description.
Right.
I'm just saying
Okay.
that right there, that alone is effing hilarious.
Okay.
He gruntled and gurgled to
Right.
communicate.
Sure.
Very, very 1970s cartoon, right? Just that alone. Okay.
Right. Kind of car like exhaust, engine-y kind of. I'm
Yes,
sure there was
of
a very
course.
right there. I'm sure there's a very detailed explanation somewhere in the writer's room about
Don't be sure.
So that's why
No.
he didn't sound like Ricardo Montalban, with a voice, this very smooth,
Yeah.
eloquent voice. It sounded
Yeah.
like an engine that was essentially trying to talk.
Yeah.
So that's my recollection. And again, this was years after a show in the 50s, right? A famous flop called My Mother the Car, but this was an animated dune buggy that could talk,
Oh my God.
talk and
Well-
have adventures.
Well, hold on a second. My Mother the Car, sorry, to do this, to be the what would you call it? The Wikipedia or the corrector or the
right.
editor here. Sorry, I don't want to be that guy, but My Mother the Car is, of course, Jerry Van Dyke,
Mhm.
who has his own charm. He's no Dick Van Dyke, but he definitely had his
certainly
own
not
charm.
Right.
But in this one, I think his mom, right? She died, and then she was reincarnated as. I'm not going to say it was
reincarnated, Jeff. Did you say reincarnated? Maybe that's it.
Well,
That's it.
Well, Chris,
go ahead.
You're
I'm sorry for
emphasizing the
interrupting.
pun, but I'm sure that's what they meant when they
Okay.
did this, reincarnated.
Okay.
And forgive me, Chris, I don't know if it was a Model T Ford or some
Mhm.
other model, but this was an old car, right? This would have
Right.
been a car from like the 1920s. So his mom is reincarnated as a car, and now he drives it, and there is
Whoa.
nonstop sexual innuendo in the show. Oh my goodness, don't push my brake that hard. Oh my gosh, that's my accelerator. You're going
Whoa.
too fast. Slow down. It's like super awkward,
Easy
really
on the gas.
cringy.
Easy
on the gas. Yeah, and the mom is just cracking really like double entendre jokes, and the whole thing was just like, I'm sorry, what
That's
now?
horrible.
Anyway, that was a weird rabbit hole. My apologies.
That was. Okay, but let's make it clear. We're not accusing Speed Buggy of any inappropriate behavior, right?
No,
We want to get that
not at
on
all.
the- right.
Oh, no.
But
no,
again-
Speed Buggy has nothing to do with this conversation. No.
So Speed Buggy, an animated car that becomes the hero and they have adventures, and kind of again gruntles and gurgles and through I don't know however many shows. So it just kind of I'm thinking about Speed Buggy, and I'm thinking about two things. Number one, that they, like I said, they took this ridiculous kind of concept um, that they pitched, and that they succeeded. And number two, the expectation is that, and granted, anybody watching a Saturday morning show could have been from the age of 4 to like maybe 10 or 11 or whatever, that we would just go for it. It's like, well, it's like the expectations were low, and boy, did we meet those low expectations because we bought it.
Why do you think it is that they believed we would lap that up? Because we did. There was never a question.
Point.
Nobody
Excellent
ever
point.
asked any questions. Oh, I'm sorry. The world is now run by apes? I'm in, right? Oh, it's a giant purple ape, and you're going to call it grape ape?
Grape ape.
I'm in, right?
Real stretch there.
Yeah, the dog talks
Nice
for some weird reason as they solve crimes. Okay, sure.
The dog has a black belt and wears a mask. Shout out Hong Kong Phooey. Absolutely.
And just happens to have the voice of Scatman Crothers. And, right? So anything goes, man. Literally, anything went back then. I mean,
That's the great, you summed it up right there. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yes, anything goes. Anything went.
Well, I mean, I guess, and we've been trained to this day to have anything be okay, right? It's like, I'm open, right? To anything you're going to do. That's how things work, because we were attuned to that back in the 70s and 80s. But by the way, you only have to go back even further than that, right? The 50s and the 40s and the 30s. Do you know that Wizard of Oz, as amazing as that movie is, the technological marvel that is, and to this day, it kind of holds up.
It holds up,
right? And just in terms of like the execution of it, the special effects and all that, which were all practical effects.
Yeah, for its time, outstanding.
That's the 30s, mother effer. That's the 1930s. And we literally had flying monkeys and talking scarecrows and a tin man, whatever the hell that even means. So, and by the way, go to a Popeye cartoon someday. Go to an early Popeye cartoon, not the ones that came later that were just repeat the same thing over and over again. When he goes to Goon Island, and you've got weird, creepy, surreal creatures, and the whole thing, again, can't believe how many times I've made this reference, but it's an acid trip. It is total LSD. It's like, what the am I watching? This is absolutely insane. A Jeep? Jeep?
The Jeep.
Right? Which I think is where the Army actually got the name for the Jeep, was the weird little creature in Popeye Jeep. That was called the Jeep, and all he said was Jeep, Jeep. But I mean,
so that was his name.
I could only imagine back then they're like in an opium den, the writers, right? And they're just like, I don't know, Chris, I'm just imagining back then it must have been opium. I don't think they had all the designer drugs we have today, but
probably not.
And they're just like, what if it says Jeep? It's like, I just keep trying to picture these guys coming up with these ideas. What if it's an island filled with goons? What's a goon?
Right.
I don't know. What the fuck isn't a goon?
And from what I understand at the time, the program was it was regulated is not the right word, but there had to be specific hours of children's programming every at least once a week, and of course they did it on Saturdays when kids were home, right? So so they probably kind of knew, it's like, well, they got to have something, right? It's like somebody's going to buy something. So it's just like they got to fill those hours with this programming. But again, I think, whereas again, our constant one common thread throughout almost all of these episodes when we're talking about television or even certain films that were, yes, boy, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in that writer's room, or hear the pitches, or hear the producers talk about these shows. Right. So, but again, like a talking-ish car, that alone showed you that there was probably nothing that was off the table, right? That it was just like, you know what? How about blank? You could have played Mad Libs with maybe they did. Maybe they used Mad Libs.
I guarantee,
to come up with these concepts. So again, I throw out Speed Buggy. I give you Speed Buggy. I'll give you one more. Jabberjaw, okay, which was a walking, talking great white shark that somehow could stand upright and go on water, talked like Curly from the Three Stooges, and And that was the concept. That was the show. And like, on the heels of what at the time was like the biggest movie ever, right? Jaws, that came out in 75. And somewhere they're like, you know what? I know this shark killed a lot of people, and I know there was deaths and blood and tear, and then people didn't even want to go to the beach anymore or go in the water. We need a show that capitalizes on that. But guess
Yeah.
what? For
Yeah.
kids, we need
Yeah.
a friendly, warm, and funny shark.
Yeah.
I give you
Right.
Jabberjaw. Give me something. Come on. So I give you Jabberjaw,
Yeah.
Jeff, or
Yeah.
Jeff, like a Jeep. Tell me, give me a counterpoint to
Well, and
Jabberjaw.
Jabberjaw, of course, was the woo, 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 right? He would
Mm-hmm.
always do the,
Yeah.
like you
Do the
said,
curly.
Curly from the Three
Do the
Stooges.
curly. Uh-huh.
And I'm sure they said, of the Three Stooges, which are also popular, right? And we still have old people that have been around and they love the Three Stooges. But we're
Sure.
trying to reach out and do this whole shark thing to make sharks nice again so we can get people to go back to the beaches. I don't know if this ever happened, but I'm just imagining in my mind.
Right.
And so let's give the shark the woo, 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 right? That
Right.
voice. Yeah, just like with Speed Buggy, right? Someone had to make the decision. Well, does this thing talk? No, it goes. And then when you look at something like Speed Buggy, then you have to look at what would happen later, where somebody that's making live action shows, right? Forget cartoons, let's make it live action, which was so popular back in the 70s. Then you have shows like Wonder Bug, right? Which is basically Speed Buggy.
Speed Buggy.
But in this case,
A knockoff.
it's always a Scooby-Doo-esque gang that stumbles upon some kind of magic or surreal thing, right?
Okay.
Whether it's Butch Patrick going to the backstage of a carnival and falling into a hat, and he discovers the world of Lidsville, which I would rather kill myself than spend 15 minutes in Lidsville, by the way. Or this, right? Which is, these kids go into a junkyard, as I remember.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they're
God,
looking for.
What a pull.
They're looking for
Deep pull.
something. So they find it, and it's a total piece of shit in the junkyard. But guess what, Chris? Do you remember what they find that brings it to life?
I want to say it was somewhat supernatural, but I can't go beyond that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. It was a horn. They found like a like a magic horn where you squeeze it and it's like right, and it does the and whatever it made. I can't remember how it went, but the magic horn brings the piece of shit fiberglass dune buggy on a Volkswagen frame to life. And now the only difference is it's red. It has the googly eyes, and the front bumper is the lips, right? And my favorite part, just like a lot of the shows back then, the horrible use of green screen, right? Where green screen was just so cheesy. And I love the scenes in Wonderbug where they actually fly through the air. It could not look worse, right?
Right.
They learned nothing from Wizard of Oz, where the flying stuff looks completely legitimate. I don't know if the budget was $15 or what happened, but you got to do yourself a favor. Go back to an episode of Wonderbug on YouTube and watch them fly.
I will do that.
It's magic.
I will do that. God, I had forgotten about that part. I just forgotten about that. It was Speed Buggy adjacent. I didn't remember that part, but that is outstanding. That is outstanding. It's standing with extending amount of detail. Yes.
I've never said this on the show, but you know me. I overuse this a lot. But I have to say that Speed Buggy Adjacent is one of the greatest names for a punk band that I have ever heard.
Okay.
So I'm just going to claim that now. Speed Buggy Adjacent is my band name from now on.
Yeah, it's like, hey, what are you doing tonight? Yeah, it's like, oh, we're going to see Speed Buggy Adjacent.
They're opening for Jabberjaw.
Well, there has to be. Okay, so again, how about something else that again, they talk about a shark or a car, that a dune buggy that would be, let's just say, unlikely protagonists for a kid's show. How about something else that you would pull out of that category, saying, here's an idea. There has to be something that kind of sticks out to you that thinks, wow, this was sort of an unlikely concept, but it actually existed. Anything pop up? There's got to be something that you kind of.
Well, I guess one of the weirdest ones I'd ever seen, and when I say weird, I don't mean it's the weirdest thing you've ever heard of, but it still plays out in my mind. I can still see episodes in my head. One of my favorite shows of all time when I was a kid, and I'm shocked that we haven't really dug into this or mentioned it too much, was the Banana Splits, right? The Banana Splits is absolutely, bar none, one of my fondest memories. And of course, it's just guys that would later in life probably inspire the furry movement, frankly, right? You've got a lion and an
we have
ape
them to thank,
and a
right?
dog, and well, I don't know, but and
They were
really,
pioneers, Jeff. Pioneers.
if you think back on the Banana Splits, they really were kind of like the Croft Super Show. The whole point of the show was to introduce other cartoons. They were kind of like the host or the MC.
Yeah, the little bridge between,
Yeah.
Right.
And so on the Banana Splits, there was a number of shows that still to this day I love, and one of them was Gulliver's Travels. Right, it's a cartoon, and it's not very original. It's basically, imagine if Gulliver was having adventures with the Lilliputians, and they had my favorite character, which was a guy named Glum, who would always say, "We'll never make it. We're doomed." Love that guy, who was the exact same character as Pebbles and Bam Bam's show, Schleprock. Right? You had the Schleprock character who's like,
damn it, that's
wowsy, wowsy,
and
woo, woo.
He had the literal
wowsy, wowsy, woo, woo.
Stop. He had the literal like storm cloud that would follow him over, and I want to say he wore like almost like a hood, right? Because he was he almost kind of covered. He was like disfigured or something.
I feel like when I think of him, it's almost like a soggy Gandalf hat is what I'm remembering, but I could be wrong.
Good. Yeah.
But he was sort of the pig pen of the group, right? So these characters kind of play out. What the fuck were we talking about? I've lost track of this entire train of thought. I don't know,
but I don't know how I'm going to get through the day without at least dropping one wowsy woo woo.
What is that? What is that?
We're gonna have to look at after that online. No, but I mean, essentially, we were just talking about again these concepts that was because there were the normal ones that you had super friends, right?
Right.
You had anything that was that was space involved. I think that the whole sort again that sort of action adventure. I mean, I think there was a Flash Gordon cartoon at one point.
Oh, okay.
Those taking off on those intellectual properties and making that. But again, that was straight out of comic books, and then you had the sort of the live action, right? Because I think that was the weird part too. Is that they also gave us, and you talk about Lisville, they also gave us some live action shows that had like a production budget of about $2.49. I mean, $2.49, not, but we, again, as kids, whether it was, Far Out Space Nuts or, what Space Arc or Jason of Star Command, that's what I'm thinking of those three, whether it was Shazam, right? And then we got to see Isis, who was Isis was, let's face it, she was a Saturday morning version of Linda Carter, but I think she was a solid contributor right there.
Pause, man. I have to pause this for 1 second because now we have to talk about Linda Carter versus
Joanna
Isis.
Cameron. Yeah.
Dude, you just got, what did you get there? I think that's probably a 35,000 point poll. So well done. But I'm going to say this. Linda Carter, who's still with us and looks absolutely beautiful and just never seems to age. And she's just such an awesome person. You never see her embroiled in controversy, like I've said before. She's
probably about 74 years old, but that's okay.
And looks amazing. Yeah, and whatever. And whatever that even means, looks amazing. I mean, whatever. But she is amazing, and she will always live in my heart in infamy. But infamy? No.
Oh, I'd say like reverence.
The opposite of that.
Yeah,
reverence. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. I'm going to give you some points for giving me the right adjective. But Joanna, is it Cameron. Joanna Cameron, man, I mean, other than the room 20 other than the room 222 girls, which we've always talked about, right? The
Karen Valentine and
and
Judy Strangis.
Judy Strangis, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I would say that Joanna Cameron is at the top of my list just in terms of like super awesome. Just like as a kid, you just have a huge crush. And I did not want to watch the ISIS show because technically I feel like that was more of a girl's show. It's a girl hero. And back then you're just like, oh, I'm not going to watch ISIS. That's a girl's hero show, whatever, right? But oh my God, did I watch that show religiously.
Until that one particular summer, and then you're like, I think I'm going to check out ISIS. And then, of course, in retrospect, didn't become the best name to use to throw in there. Hey, do you like ISIS? What are you talking about?
And by the way, just the fact that you said that one summer that I thought I might check out ISIS, we are now on a watch list. We are technically on a watch list.
Got it.
And I could actually be deported at any time now. So I'm just waiting for that to happen. Right?
Okay. If we hear banging on the door, it's not ISIS, it's ice. But I think that the thing about that is that it was clearly a Saturday morning version. So what did that mean? The costume was almost looked like a kind of just this polo, like not you know what I mean? Just not revealing at all, and not really for lack of a better term, sexy, which wasn't really allowed on Saturday morning TV, let's face it. But I mean, but it was clearly, I mean, while it was clearly inspired and even, rip off or Wonder Woman adjacent. There's you go. There's an all girl punk band for you. But it was clearly, model after that. And it was kind of like, yeah, that's good enough. The kids will eat this up, and maybe their dads will sit there and watch it too. So we need to slip an ad in there for Chevy Nova or something like that.
There wasn't a shit ton of content, and it was the early days of experimenting with what a TV audience would even want to see. And they were already getting surprised by things that were a hit versus things that they thought would be a sure thing that weren't a hit. And so they're like, well, I mean, how is it that the Addams Family only has a short run, but the Munsters is off the charts and keeps going and going and going? If something works back then, they're going to do 1,000 ripoffs, right? Scooby-Doo, my God, what did it go for? 25, 30, 40 seasons? And then you had ripoff shows. There was 1,000 shows back then, Chris. Do you remember all the cartoon shows that were basically Scooby-Doo, but just in a slightly different flavor?
Sure.
Like Goober and the Ghost Chasers.
Oh, God.
And, where it would every time I got scared, it would turn invisible. That was the,
Yes.
And just a million other ones.
Right. Solving crimes, solving mysteries. Scooby-Doo probably a bit ahead of its time because Scooby-Doo had like guest stars like Sonny and Cher, or I think they had the Three Stooges. And then I think they also had like Batman and Robin, which were like, okay, so we've got like real live pop stars and we have cartoon superheroes, but it all worked, right?
Yeah. Right.
And then I think they made cartoon, but again, looking at any intellectual property and what can we sell and make a cartoon of, cartoon versions of like Gilligan's Island, which had already been off the air. Right. And like Gilligan's on like another planet or something like that.
Gilligan's Planet was a show. You're right.
Yes.
That's right.
And it's same concept. It's like, okay, guess what? It happened again.
I forgot about that.
There's all of us, crash landed. And here we are again. We're castaways again.
And Chris, then you had on Gilligan's Planet. Sorry, I was on a little bit of a tangent here. You had Gilligan's Planet, which was actually introduced on Saturday mornings as, hey, coming up in the fall. Remember, Chris, the fall preview.
Oh, the fall
Here's
preview
all the
shows.
cartoons that are coming up. Yeah.
And
Gilligan's Planet, and if you were a kid, you had to watch that show. You had to be there. It was always in the evening, right, Chris? And it was right before they were going to launch a brand new round of shows.
Like the Friday night before. I want to say it was the night before.
Yeah. And you had to make a decision as a kid. Am I going to watch the ABC, the NBC, or the CBS version?
Oh, my God, the fall previews.
Of the fall preview. And the ads and TV Guide were so like, oh, my God, I want to see the Grape Ape one. But then again, they're also going to be relaunching this other thing, Electra Woman and Dyna Girl. So I don't know, man.
Super Friends,
and you can't tape them really because even in the 70s, right, it was still really early technology. So
no, and you couldn't watch it. You couldn't find it on the next day. It would never, and you couldn't go watch it on YouTube, obviously. Those were like, and then they always, but again, they would like intermix that with like maybe a pop star, like maybe Leif Garrett or Andy Gibb would like do a song or something like that. So, Leif,
Chris,
sorry,
Leif
I'm sorry. I
Garrett.
know. You know, I got
He's been
corrected.
very clear about that over the years. Okay,
Someone
Leif
is he
Garrett.
still alive?
I don't know.
I think I was corrected on that one time, literally at like the warehouse, and we were mocking like a Leif Garrett album cover, and these two girls who were younger than us lost their shit over it. Another
The
store
warehouse? You
at
mean
the
the
warehouse,
actual album store, the warehouse?
yeah, the record store, the warehouse, yeah,
Where?
not
At the
at
warehouse.
the warehouse.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, so you're right. So they would pump up these shows, and then it was literally like, I can't wait to get up and watch them.
Yeah.
And then
Oh,
again,
the
the
best
mix
feeling,
of the live,
dude.
and maybe it was, and
Oh.
hey, and hey, maybe the Harlem Globetrotters have a new show. There was an anime, the Harlem Globetrotters, which are
I
still
know.
around, and
Right.
and are a, you know, they trick basketball team. We've all seen them. How do they have a cartoon again? But they pick, what are they doing? Because there's nothing more exciting than watching cartoon characters play basketball, I'd have to say. But I think the dinosaur thing was where the dinosaurs and those opportunities,
Yeah.
that's
Right.
where things blew up on Saturday
Yeah.
morning about
For
like,
sure,
oh
man.
yeah, here's you, we got a concept for you. And I know you have
Well,
thoughts. I know you have some favorites on as far as those go.
Chris, the fascination with Hollywood and Saturday morning cartoons and live action shows with cavemen and dinosaurs.
Captain Caveman.
My God.
Again,
You got
a
Captain
hero.
Caveman, which is a silly version of it.
Right.
Captain
Hey.
Caveman, you know.
Yes.
And then you had serious ones. We talked about this before. Korg, 70,000 BC, which is a live action show following, you know, a caveman. Then you had all the famous caveman things, you know, from Ray Harryhausen to 1 million years BC with Raquel Welch to later on with Ringo Starr and Barbara Bach, you know, the movie Caveman, to the Flintstones, all these shows. But one of the ones that I thought was really interesting and at the time was a show called Valley of the Dinosaurs, which was a cartoon about, get this, Chris, and I want you to close your eyes for a second and try to picture this scenario, because I don't think this has ever been done before. All right. So there's a cartoon.
Closing my eyes now. Okay.
On September 7th, I did look it up, in the year 1974, Valley of the Dinosaurs, a cartoon show, was released on Saturday mornings. Here's what it is. A family is in a raft, and they're on a river, and it's a river rafting trip. But guess what, Chris? Their river rafting trip ultimately transports them into, dun, 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 a land that time forgot, the Valley of the Dinosaurs. And now they're in the dinosaur world. Chris, have you ever heard of any other show that had somewhat of a similar premise to this?
I have heard of a show that had, I don't know, the exact premise as this, and I'm thinking it was called Land of the Lost. Am I wrong?
There you go. Well done.
All
and I'm going to give you that poll. Well done, sir.
Well,
so, and Chris, can you name who was in that raft?
I can't.
Well, Chris, it may have been, as memory serves, Marshall, Will, and Holly on a routine expedition met the greatest earthquake ever known. High on the rapids, it struck their tiny raft and plunged them down 1,000 feet below to the land of the lost.
Bravo.
This is the perfect segue. And by the way, Chris, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Jeff, to be fair to the Sid and Marty show, Land of the Lost, maybe Land of the Lost came first and then Valley of the Dinosaurs, the cartoon. But Chris, I did some research, and guess what I found? On September 7th of 1974, both of those shows premiered on the exact same mother effing day. 2 shows about a family on a raft getting plunged into a land that time forgot, filled with dinosaurs. Now, of course, Land of the Lost, back to the acid and the mushrooms and the peyote, is a little more surreal. The other one is a little more straightforward, but Again, Chris, the writer's room, it always goes back to the writer's room. You know full fucking well that somebody blabbed to someone else and somebody got somebody's idea. We don't know where it happened. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but
oh, go ahead. They're probably all dead.
It's possible that there was a little bit of a leak, right?
There was some shenanigans. A script
shenanigans.
Or somebody
right.
it's like maybe they, I don't know, did they sell ideas? Hey, here's what we got cooking over at NBC, right? I think it was on NBC.
Who knows?
Right. Some sort of, corporate espionage, right? Something. That's I think 2 dinosaur shows, okay. But 2 dinosaur shows, with, families, modern day families, okay. On the river, on a raft.
In a raft?
Wait a minute. Get spun out of, get lost off course. But here's the thing. Land of the Lost sustained itself, right? And we're going to talk, that was, whereas Valley of the Dinosaurs, there was never a live action feature with Will Ferrell and Danny McBride of Valley of the Dinosaurs.
True. Right. And Land of the Lost, in its heyday, was one of the number 1 shows on television, period. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, audience, you might be wondering why we're harping here a lot about Land of the Lost. And here's why. Chris and I were able to use the Google machine and find a guest for the show.
And we tease this.
Yeah, that is directly, I would say, linked to the show Land of the Lost, or indirectly, but same thing. So, Chris, let's go ahead and do this for our, audience at home. Let's go ahead and take a look in the liquor cabinet down below and see who our guest is, who our special mystery guest is for Nice Pull. What do you say, Chris? Should we roll the tape?
Roll the tape. Let's see what's in that cabinet.
So for those of you guys that are listening in right now and actually watching us, I wanted to introduce our guest today, who is none other than Brent Marr, the Portland Sleestak. Brent, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
So many questions, man. And by the way, Brent is actually joining us live from Portland, right? So we now have our man on the street, or lizard on the street, or whatever you want to say.
Right.
Brent, let me start by just asking you, for the sake of the folks that are watching, explain the initial attraction to the Sleestak, or what got you to think, hey man, I should create a stunningly accurate studio quality costume that looks exactly like a Sleestak, and then do this with it. So first let's start with what got you into Sleestaks, and then you can tell us what it is you do with that costume.
Well, I was a 6-year-old little boy when Land of the Lost came out. So, Land of the Lost had everything a 6-year-old loved. Aliens, weird creatures, dinosaurs. When I was little, I knew the names of every dinosaur, what period they lived in, how big they were, what they ate, So I was immediately a fan as soon as I saw dinosaurs chasing people, and from there, like just about every Gen Xer I can think of, the Sleestaks terrified me. I don't know why. Looking back at them, they're the dumbest, slowest creatures you could ever imagine. But I remember being able to tell my sister that the Sleestaks would get her, and she would cry, and they terrified me too. Maybe because they didn't speak, or you didn't know what their motivations were. I don't know. But as far as making the costume, it didn't really start out the way it turned out. I originally just wanted a mask, and I was going to put on a tuxedo or a leisure suit and use it as like a Halloween idea, just the dancing Sleestak for a night. And I looked for a mask commercially, and when I couldn't find one, I decided, well, how hard can it be to make a rubber mask? I kind of knew that you needed to sculpt something, and then you made a mold, and from there you cast the mask, and then you put it on. And once I got started with sculpting my first head, it really honestly took on a life of its own, and it's kind of guided its own path since then.
What's the weirdest reaction you've gotten from somebody when they see the costume? Maybe the craziest one.
The weirdest thing is that the littlest of kids will just light up and run right up to me and wrap their arms around me. You know, I don't think I would have been that kid. I mean, I would have been curious, but I would have been 20 feet away and pointing and asking questions. You know, I certainly wouldn't run up and give the monster a hug, you know, but
well, Brent, there's a term for that. That's called bad parenting. That's what that is.
Right.
Chris, do you mind thinking back to that day and time that you might have seen Land of the Lost for the first time, and your first impression of the Sleestak? Terrified, intrigued, or did you just walk out of the room and do something else?
I think because of the whole thing about dinosaurs, was that real? Were Sleestaks real? I think it probably took my older brother to pop that balloon and go, there's no such thing as a Sleestak. So I think, but it just sort of hung, you know, over the years, and what to me, and Brent, maybe I was going to ask a little bit about your motivations or what you do once you've got this suit on, in the sense of, like, if you ask probably anybody that watched Land of the Lost religiously or had a passing, familiarity with it, everybody will say, oh yeah, Sleestak.
Well, the first couple outings were at, I would wait outside the elevator at a local smart park and, you know, wait for people to park their cars and come down. And when the elevator opened, there I was standing there. And that was the one time that I did get an occasional scream. But even with that, even just the door opens and here's Sleestak standing there, even then it was like lit up like Christmas and come running out to get a selfie in, 9 out of 10 cases for sure.
Exactly.
Well, Brent, let me ask you this beyond that. Let's go back to the show itself really quick. What stands out as maybe the weirdest episode? The one where, when I think of a show like Lost in Space, for instance, the weirdest episode was when they were talking to a guy dressed like a giant carrot. Right. When they fully jump the shark and you're like, oh my God, have they run out of ideas? What is the weirdest one that you can recall from your childhood memory?
There was one in particular that something happened to one of the pylons. The stones got mixed up and it was causing all the dinosaurs a huge amount of distress. And so 90% of the dialogue in the entire episode was the dinosaurs screeching and roaring at each other. And, I remember seeing it as a kid and then rewatching it just recently in the last couple of years for whatever reason. And it was at that moment that it dawned on me why my mother screamed at me from the other room to turn that shit down. Just a bunch of screeching and hollering and groaning and moaning and, just barely any human talking at all. It was really grating as an adult, but I'm sure I loved it as a kid. It didn't bother me at all then. But
well, it's bad enough when your kid is in his room with a locked door, but when you hear those noises, you do have to wonder what's going on in there, right? You got to at least ask questions. What are you doing in there?
Right. Well, yeah, one of the main writers of the show was actually the guy who wrote the Trouble with Tribbles episode, among others, on the original Star Trek series. Yeah, David Giroux.
Wow.
I believe he was the creator of the concept of the Sleestak as well.
Wow.
And then another famous guy from stop motion circles back then did the actual design of the suits. But I follow him on Facebook too. He's actually fun to follow. I think Walter Koenig from the original Star Trek series, I think he wrote at least 1 or 2 episodes for the show.
No kidding.
And I believe there were actually several Star Trek writers that kind of crossed over here and there. So yeah, and there were some great storylines, and like the Flying Dutchman, that he wanted to kidnap Holly, I think, and there Medusa made an appearance, the Abominable Snowman, the guy that played Jaws in the James Bond movies.
Oh, Richard Kiel.
Yeah, he did a part on that show.
Okay. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure, Brent. Thank you so much again. The fact that we ever ran into each other at all, again, I'll just leave that to the universe. Super cool to get to know you. So glad that there's someone like you out there just making those twisted 1970s and early 80s memories, a reality in the most obscure, fun way possible. So thank you for everything you're doing. I know you're having a blast, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. Hey, before we let you go, can you let us know how people can look you up and find you?
Well, I have a YouTube channel. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, TikTok as well.
All right, so everybody at home, that is Portland Sleestak. Check out all the stuff that Brent is up to. And again, wink, wink. We'll be seeing and hearing from him again. Thanks again, Brent. And best of luck this evening, terrorizing people.
Oh, of course. Thanks, Brent. Thank you.
Okay, well, Jeff, that was pretty wild. And it's always one of those things, like after you talk to somebody, it's like, oh, I should have asked Brent about this or that. And right. Maybe I think maybe we should have prepared. Maybe we should have asked him to put the mask, or we should have started with him on wearing the mask. Although I don't know how well you would have been able to hear him through the mics. That was wild, though. Again, somebody who's devoted to their craft of being a Sleestak, which I think is hilarious, because I think there's so many people, and we'll probably, I guess we'll find out when you just have to say Sleestak and people know what you're talking about. But that was fun. That was an interesting, I don't know if that's a rabbit hole. That was an interesting Sleestak hole to dive down with Brent. I'm sorry. And
Hold on, Chris. You did it. You now found the 3 different acts that are playing in my punk rock show, and Sleestak Hole is definitely one of the bands. Oh my God. We've got so many great bands.
Okay.
We've got, what was it? Speed Buggy Adjacent? We've got Sleestak Hole, and we've got Jabberjaw.
And we got Jabberjaw.
I think that is the greatest lineup.
That was a great show. That was a great show, Jeff. You should have gone. I told you should have gone.
Before we move on, don't you think, though, that Sleestak Hole would be the headliner? That has to be the headliner. I think Jabberjaw is going to open the show, and then I think Speed Buggy Adjacent, and then the big headlining act is Sleestak Hole. That has to be the
They didn't even come on till almost midnight. That's how big they were.
That is day 3 of Coachella right there. All right.
Hopefully we get some more Sleestak stories down the road. That was crazy. So again, we knew we were heading this direction, but still we started out this conversation leaning into, whether it was Jabberjaw or Gulliver's Travels, or, Speed Buggy / Wonder Bug, to the live action juxtaposition, jumping back and forth, the age old Linda Carter, Joanna Cameron. Hey, everybody's a winner.
Is that age old?
Well, it is now. It's been at least for the last half hour.
It is in my mind.
It is, always. I mean, I think if you go, oh yeah, you and I were on that raft, and we were going down that river, and lo and behold, here we are with yet another episode of Nice Pull. And now one thing left to do is just say, all right. And I think I know this way this one is going, because you had some pulls that almost, knocked the wind out of me. But let's go. Let's see.
The great thing is, it's not up to us, because that would rip our friendship apart.
It would.
Right? Luckily, we have a completely objective scorekeeper, which is artificial intelligence. And as I've mentioned, I have trained it to find all of the pop culture references that we've made, score them based on how obscure they are, and then give us a final score. So, Chris, again, as I've said many times, I keep saying without further ado, you may as well use the word rue the day, but let's just keep with that vernacular. Without further ado, let's see who won.
Here's a little bit more ado. Okay, now without further ado.
Let's see who won this episode of Nice Pull. Chris wins.
I am back on top. I've got one in a row, despite what I thought I was getting blown out. But
no, that's fair, man. That's fair. You hit some deep ones, Chris. I got to give you credit. You definitely hit some very, very deep pulls on that episode. So good for you, man.
Even though
absolutely, yeah.
The only thing I can say to that, Jeff, is wowsy, woo woo. And hey, call me Schlep Rock. I won.
That's right.
There's not much left to say.
Other than?
Until next time, Jeff.
Until next time, Chris.